What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Rad Chad Show. Today we have got a very good episode for you. We are going to cover everything I missed in my previous episode, but this one might actually be better because I've played even some new games that I wasn't necessarily anticipating talking about in my previous episode. We're doing this straight from a webcam today, so if this is your first time seeing the show, we're basically doing a trial to compare and contrast how the quality of this camera looks compared to my other camera. So hey, if it doesn't turn out, no worries. We'll get back to the way things were in the next episode, but this layout is really awesome. Number one, it's easy. I can have notes over here. I can have my cool stuff shopping cart, my BoardGameGeek logged plays. I can sit in a chair and I can have a dog. This is our new pup Marzi hanging out with me so that she doesn't pee on the floor. And I think in general this will be good, but you guys don't care about any of that. What you care about is some board games. Let's talk about them right now and get these shades off my face, and we'll do that right after the intro. Okay, so let's talk some board games. We've got 20 minutes or less to do this. That's kind of the timestamp I want to put on these podcasts from now on. I've played a lot, but what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 4 games that I've played recently. We're going to talk about, and these are all basically initial impressions. I haven't played any of these enough to do a full review. Otherwise, you would have seen the full review by now, and I wouldn't be talking about them. So we'll talk about some initial impressions of this War of Mine, Branch and Claw, the Spirit Island expansion. We talked about that in the last episode, but I'll dive a little more in depth this time around. Magic Maze, Tiny Epic Galaxies. Those are the 4 games that I've played recently. And last but not least, we'll wrap up on just some kind of new games that are just now releasing that I may or may not be purchasing, such as Betrayal at Baldur's Gate, Aeon's End 2nd Edition, hopefully I pronounced that correctly. And then finally, Seventh Continent, which is just exploding on Kickstarter right now. It's insane how much money that game is making. But the first thing that I want to talk about is this War of Mine. The retail release just came out. I totally missed the Kickstarter. I don't back many Kickstarters to begin with, so I probably wouldn't have backed it anyways. But that being said, I know that the video game was a smash hit. I personally haven't played it, even though I play a ton of video games. People will ask me sometimes, they'll be like, you know, what games do you play? And my answer is all of them. And I own all of them, basically. So this is one of the few rare exceptions that I haven't played this. I know about it, but I haven't played it. The board game, I've played it twice now. Both have been solo, which from the get-go, let me just say that the solo experience of this game is virtually identical to the way that you would play if it was multiplayer. Essentially, when one person is controlling the board per se, they control all of the characters. And you continue to control all the characters, and you make the final decision up until this journal essentially says, hey, switch over to the next player. Then they take full control. Now, if you were playing cooperative, you would have a lot more dialogue and discussion about, you know, what's actually the right move to make for your collective group, because the game is a cooperative game. So the general concept here is there's been some sort of disaster, right? It's essentially a war-torn city. You've got like your house bunker, I guess you can call it. It's totally dilapidated. Nothing's running right. And you've really got to scavenge and build things from scratch in order to survive. There's a really brutal winter out there that's beating you down. So during the day phase, you know, you might do things like you might build a water trap so that you can have clean water, or you might do things as simple as shoveling out rubble from your house so that you can get to other areas, so that you can search through a heap pile and get more, wood to build a fire to prevent some of the cold from happening. So it's kind of sort of like a worker placement-esque game at the very beginning. And then you go into this night phase, which is, at least in my opinion, where things get primarily interesting. So it's sort of divided into, I'll call it 2 sections. You've got like this exploration side of it, and then you've got the defense of your home. So this is where everybody goes out and does their thing. And so if you send out your people, they go to one of 3 different locations. And at those locations, you get a very small deck of exploration cards. And it's sort of got this like blackjack, almost like push your luck element to it, where if you're exploring these locations, you start revealing one explore card after another explore card. And those explore cards might tell you to do things like to go look through this book of scripts, and you might have an encounter where, I don't know, you meet some hobos on the side of the road and you could possibly interact with them to trade, or maybe they don't speak your language and they steal all of your stuff. And so you can have those encounters in that deck. You can also find a whole bunch of loot. You can get into combat encounters with people, and it's kind of really interesting because you can play it safe. So you reveal one of these cards, and it might say, okay, well, you find a ladder. Do you want to take the slow way and go like around the ladder, up the stairs, and bypass the enemies that are nearby the ladder? Or do you want to increase this noise marker, go straight for it, go up that ladder, and then you risk the chance of some bad repercussions happening, because a lot of times you'll have to roll for the amount of noise that you're making as you're scavenging for items. And if you ever roll something poor, for example, and your roll is equal to or less than this noise level that you've increased as you've kind of been recklessly scavenging around, then bad things can happen. You know, maybe those hobos hear about you because you're rummaging around in their stuff, and then here they come and they try to beat you with pitchforks and axes. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up at this point. But it's really neat how you can push your luck. Like, you want to draw more of these exploration cards because then it gives you more items. But at the same time, you don't want to increase that noise level, which will typically happen if you don't take your time in doing these things. So it's a really unique and interesting concept. That is one of the two things that I like most so far about the game. The other thing is that book of scripts. So I really love storytelling board games. This book of scripts is like insane thick. Now, a lot of these excerpts are pretty small. You get like a little paragraph that tells a story, but some of the stories are pretty dark. They're harrowing, but they're very fascinating. And between the components and the artwork and all of the mechanics of the game, when you start mixing all of those with this heavily based story book, it really does bring out the atmosphere that they're going for with this game. And I really think that it has theme in spades, which is one of the best qualities this game has going for it. The other thing that I want to talk about with the night phase is that you also might have to put people to guard your door. So just like you guys find it safer to go out and scavenge at night, other people might be coming in trying to scavenge your building, and those people normally are not good. So you might want to put somebody to guard the front of your door. You might want to barricade your front door to prevent people from coming in and looting your stuff as you're looting their stuff. And you might want to equip them with guns, for example, so that you can take out people and they don't deal wounds. I liked the night phase. I felt like the night phase was a little bit more interesting than the day phase, where, again, in that day phase, it's a worker placement game for the most part. And it really harkens back to Robinson Crusoe. Now, in one of I think it was my first podcast, I talked about First Martians. I hated First Martians. I really did not like that game at all. But for whatever reason, I was compelled to go out there and get Robinson Crusoe, which I've played a couple times now. And Robinson Crusoe actually really impressed me. Now, it's still too heavy of a game. We'll talk about the heaviness of this war of mine here in just a second. But Robinson Crusoe had atmosphere and immersion and theme in spades. And I feel like this war of mine, in the sense that like you can go build these items to try to create a habitat that is conducive for you guys to actually survive, is basically identical between Robinson Crusoe and this War of Mine. And I really like that about the two games. I think that mechanically Robinson Crusoe is a click stronger, albeit a bit more complicated of a game than this War of Mine is mechanically, which is mainly found in that day phase, which is probably why I was a little disappointed by the day phase in this War of Mine. But I've got to play it some more. I'm becoming more comfortable in learning, you know, hey, here are the steps in which you need to take to survive, right? You desperately are going to need clean water. You desperately are going to need to barricade your door so that you can prevent things like the cold from outside happening or from your stuff getting taken away. And so it's really a learning experience. I mean, like, you're destined for failure your first few games, and I think that might rub people the wrong way. For me personally, that depravity, that depressiveness, if that's even a word, I sort of like. It's very bleak, it's grim, but it does a good job at being what it is. So the last thing I want to talk about with this War of Mine is the complexity, but more importantly, like the rules of the game. So it's got this journal, and in sort of a video game-esque fashion, as you get to certain steps throughout the game, you're flipping pages through the journal, and it just kind of walks you through what you need to do, sort of the way that a video game does. You learn a new special ability. Hey, a little pop-up goes on the screen. It tells you how to use that special ability, so you learn as you go. I don't think it works in any way, shape, or form in this specific board game. There are way too many rules questions that are just not answered in the journal. The journal references for you to go into this book of scripts, and then there's like frequently asked questions within there and other rules. So it sort of acts as a rules reference, but it's nowhere near as comprehensive as the rules reference that you would find in something like a Fantasy Flight game. And so just a lot of questions arise, like, for example, the cold tokens, are those limited? Turns out that they actually are. Man, I wish I had written some of these down, because I probably had like 4 or 5 things that I wrote down in my phone that I wanted to Google search later as I was playing the game, because the rule question didn't have an answer that was readily available as I was playing. And so I found that to be a pretty major problem, and would be my biggest criticism about the game right now, besides what I would consider just a lack of direction is probably the way of putting it. Like, you get dropped in here, everything is to heck, and they're just like, deal with it. And it's tough to do. They're setting you up for failure, and you got to acknowledge that going into this game. So I talked a lot about this War of Mine, way more than I expected. Let's dive into Branch and Claw, the Spirit Island expansion. I've played it 3 times now, once as a solo and twice with 2 people. And I got to tell you 2 main things. Number one is the base game of Spirit Island was already insanely replayable. There are so many different characters to play as. There's so many different minor and major powers to experience. There's so many different scenarios and difficulty levels. Like, you really didn't need more content in the game. But I liked the game a lot, and I especially wanted more characters just because they're awesome. Okay, and so going into this expansion, I was even more floored, because the amount of replayability that it adds, like, they literally double the size of your minor and your major deck of power cards. And those power cards mean basically everything. I mean, that's all of the actions that you take are dictated by what power cards you have. And you are maybe going to gain, I don't know, somewhere probably between 5 and maybe 10 power cards per game, but these decks are like wicked thick now. So I first of all, I love that about the game. And some of the major power cards, like there's a volcano eruption, for example, it's just super sweet. It does like 20 damage, and that's awesome when you erupt this volcano and there was a bunch of towns and cities and dudes on a land, and you're just like, nah, bro, you guys are all gone. And then you kill everything. It's wonderful. I love it. The 2 new characters I think play fairly well. There's one, I've got it set it up behind me. There's like a tiger character, and so the game comes with a whole bunch of new tokens. Those tokens have got like creatures that will run around, and they sort of like nip at invaders, and they can activate special abilities on specific cards. Then you've got tokens that prevent the invaders from exploring, from building, and they essentially defend lands. But there are a lot of tokens. And so the tiger, I'll call it a main character, he uses those beast tokens that wander around a lot. And he's got like this special ability that as the beast tokens move around, you can move your presence around with it. I didn't use it much when that special ability when I played as him. I just didn't feel like it was necessary. And man, boy, it made the game really, really complicated. And then you're throwing in things like all those tokens, the event cards, which we'll talk about in a second, scenarios. The game's already complex, and this expansion takes it complexity to a whole new level. We'll talk about that more in a second when I talk about the events. But I want to talk about the other character, because he's kind of like he looks like Groot, basically. And he's super awesome because his top row, where you gain your energy when you place your presence out on the board, he can get wicked amounts of energy. So if you're drawing major power cards and using him, you will have enough money to play multiple major cards per turn. I think like he maxes at 9 energy per turn, and I think he can even get energy on some of his growth options. I think maybe even one of them is you get 3 energy. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure. Anyways, when you're playing multiple major power cards in one turn, I talked about that volcano being ridiculously awesome. This guy allows you to do that volcano except a lot, and it's super cool when you get there. But he's kind of like a slow build. So I like both the characters. I definitely like the Groot guy better than I do the Tiger guy. So between the replayability and the new characters, I already really enjoy the expansion. The problem is the base game is tremendously complicated. Just because it's like death by a million bites or death by a million cuts, right? In the sense that it's death by a million individual small rules. Now, they're all easy, but keeping track of all of them can get kind of ridiculous. And now you're throwing in all these tokens you got to remember. There are new costs that are associated with your growth options on your characters. You got things like the new event cards that come out. The event cards have got a bunch of steps that adds more time for you to actually play as the invaders, which I don't really like doing. It forces you to play with a scenario. It adds a new board, kind of keep track of all of that junk. It just adds too much. And the problem is I would love to play with things like just the new characters. But that Tiger character, for example, he relies so heavily on those beast tokens that you have to include the beast tokens. And if you include the beast tokens, well, hey, guess what? You really need to include the events and you need to include the scenarios. And so really the expansion kind of forces you to either use all of the expansion or use none of the expansion, and there's no in between. It's not like you can just throw in the minor and major power cards, because some of those minor and major power cards require the tokens to activate their special ability. So I don't know. It's just a click too complex. I still think it's worth your while, especially if you love Spirit Island and the complexity is no big deal to you. I like it a lot. We'll see where it ends up going with my final review. Anyways, we're at like 15 minutes long in this, but I do want to talk about a couple more things. Played one single game of Magic Maze. My wife loved it. Now, I liked Escape Curse of the Temple. I was hoping that this game would bring back kind of my love for the whole time-based cooperative games. It couldn't be further from the case. In fact, I grew really stale and tired of Escape. I ended up selling or trading it off. I played Magic Maze with my family. First of all, it just wasn't the right environment. They're very much more gateway gamers. So think things like King of Tokyo or Bang the Dice game or Dixit. All of those go normally extremely well with my family. This game's just a click too complex, and I think it's really depending on, even some of the beginning scenarios are difficult. But where I'm going with all this is you really do need a group that wants to play this game, and if you don't have that group, I think that this game will be flat like a dud. I've sort of become the part where, yeah, sure, I can grasp the game, and I don't have any problems playing it, but I'm just kind of done with this whole idea of time-based games. I don't like being under the pressure restrictions of being in a time-based situation. It just doesn't make the game fun. It just makes it frustrating for me. And I don't get like in this sort of frenzy. Instead, I get sort of like in this mellowed out state. But it's not a good mellow. It's like when your blood sugar is really low and you feel like you're about to pass out. It's like that sort of mellow, and maybe it's because it's this mix between having anxiety with the time, but then also trying to de-stress and remove. I don't know. It's something about these games just don't work for me. So that was Magic Maze. Then we played Tiny Epic Galaxy. Now this goes back a couple weeks, maybe even 3 weeks ago. And this was somebody else's game, whereas I own the other ones that we mentioned. I've never played any of the Tiny Epic games. I have almost no interest in playing any of the Tiny Epic games. And even after playing Tiny Epic Galaxies, which I enjoyed for the most part, we'll say why in just a second, but I still don't have any interest in playing any of these Tiny Epic games. I just find that they want to be a big game except in a small box, and that small box sure is more conducive to being on your shelf, for example, or it's more portable, but the component quality of the games just aren't there. I'm just like, I'd rather have a fully fleshed out big box experience. So then you get to the, okay, well, how does it stand just on the gameplay mechanics? Does the game merits alone, not necessarily the component quality, justify it being, a good, worthwhile game? And I think, it was good. The The problem is in today's environment, you really have to be a head and shoulders above and beyond everything else. There's just too many games out on the market today for you to have a good or maybe even mediocre game, which is, I would put this probably in the okay to good category, maybe like a 6, 6.5, possibly a 7 out of 10. I only played it once, so I couldn't really say. It just wasn't quite good enough for me to be like, yeah, I'm dying, itching to play it again. Now, we played some rules wrong for a part of the game. I thought that it has some unique mechanics to it. So, for example, you can follow other people's actions. So they take an action, and then you can follow their action, which sort of keeps you engaged in what everybody's doing. It's got a unique multiple currency system, and you can also place your ships all across the board, and then you've got these races for who's going to finish a specific card. So I might place my ship on a card, and you got to basically pay currency to finally achieve and get that card, which then becomes one of your special abilities and victory points. But somebody else can go put their ship on that same card, and whoever achieves the card first by paying that currency gets that card. So there's this race element to the game. Again, there's special abilities. I always love special abilities in games. And so I think that mechanically it's sound. It's got everything there. It doesn't stand out. And so overall, Tiny Epic Galaxies I thought was a good game, just not a great game. And so last but not least, since we're over time, Betrayal at Baldur's Gate. I'm intrigued by this one. Betrayal at House on the Hill I had purchased. We had played several times. The rules were just way too fiddly. There was too many exceptions. It became too complicated. And then we didn't play it all that often. So I liked the game. I thought it had a great theme and a great concept. Betrayal at Baldur's Gate may or may not improve some of those things. I love the idea that it adds in a fully cooperative, 10 or so scenarios that are fully cooperative. So that's probably why I'll give this one a shot, especially because it's got a fairly low price tag for that game and the amount of replayability you can get if you were to truly play all 50 scenarios. Then there's Aeon's End 2nd Edition. This is another one that I'm possibly looking forward to. Now, I bought the first edition. I played it a measly one time. I'm terrible about doing this. I play things one time, and if you don't really strike me as being amazing, again, there's too many games out there. I will give it a pass. Now, I'm not going to do a review for it, for example, but I'll give it a pass and I'll move on to something else. I mean, that initial impression is critical these days. And one of the things about the first edition was just the game was butt ugly. There will be people who defend the graphic design and the artwork of that game tooth and nail, but I'm telling you, it looked like a B board game, like a B movie is to a blockbuster smash. It looked like a B board game. And so the new graphic design, while a little more generic, I think looks beautiful. And I know that my brother-in-law who played it with me, he really liked it. And I definitely think that this was one of those cases where I was selling a whole bunch of board games, and I was like, what the heck, I can probably fetch a decent price for it. Let's just go ahead and sell it, make some room on the shelf. And now it might have, maybe, I haven't taken the purchase plunge yet, but there might be just enough here because the game's got great reviews. I mean, people seem to love it, so I probably need to give it another shot. And then last but not least is I backed Seventh Continent on Kickstarter, and it seems like everybody else has done that as well, because I think the Kickstarter is almost at $2 million. It's some insane amount of money. And it just goes to show, if you've got a new, unique concept with board games, if you've got great production values, you've got a great game, people will support you. And this is one of the few examples where I felt a little more secure about making my Kickstarter pledge, just based off of some of the feedback that was to be had already with the game. And you're getting a just wicked ton of content if you're getting the base game and the expansion. So I sold off a bunch of board games, and Seventh Continent is one of the ones that I bought with some of that money that I received from selling off board games. And I'm also thrilled when Kickstarter games say, oh yeah, we're releasing the game 7 years from now, and I'm exaggerating obviously, but it feels like that sometimes. Well, this one, obviously they've already done one Kickstarter. This is their second. They know that manufacturing time. It sounds like they, obviously the development's already done. So to get this game in, I think February, March, wherever it was, hey, that's a reasonable wait that I can manage. And so I'm looking forward to this one. I saw Tom Vassel's review went up, and he just was head over heels for the game. And so really, I'm very excited about Seventh Continent. So basically, that's what's been going on over here, playing a lot of games. I'm probably going to play this War of Mine again tonight, and then Branch and Claw, you can see it's set up over there. I'll definitely play that one again. And as soon as I get an opportunity, I mean, the next reviews are Too Many Bones will probably be first, then Branch and Claw, then this War of Mine, provided I don't get strewn off and decide to play Dead of Winter, Flick 'em Up, or Sword and Sorcery, which I talked a little bit about last time. Because you know what? I love to get fixated on one game, play it a whole bunch, and then do a review. And Too Many Bones was that for me for the past couple of weeks. And not to say that I lost interest in that game. I just got some other things in the mail, and I was like, "Ooh, pretty shiny new thing. Let's play it." It's typical board gamer stuff. If you guys are on BoardGameGeek, you know what I'm talking about. Cult of the New. Anyways, here to support the Cult of the New, as always, was the Rad Chad, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you for watching the Rad Chad Show. Till next time.